You're sitting in your car in the parking lot outside work, engine still running. It's 6:47 in the morning and you got here 12 minutes early because something in you needed the quiet. The coffee in your cup holder is still hot. The radio's off. And you're doing the math again, the same math you did last night before bed, the same math you'll do on your lunch break, the same math that has become so automatic you don't even notice it starting anymore. Rent is due in 9 days, the credit card minimum is Thursday, and you have $340 in checking that has to somehow cover both. Sound familiar? Because this is where a lot of people live. Not in poverty, exactly, not in crisis technically, but in this permanent in-between, where you're employed, you're functional, you show up, you pay most things mostly on time, and yet you cannot seem to get one single inch ahead. You know someone who makes less than you and somehow seems less stressed. You've watched people with similar salaries talk about vacations and home repairs and investment accounts like these are normal human activities, and something about that conversation makes you feel like you missed a class everyone else attended. Maybe it's the subscriptions you should cancel. Maybe it's the takeout. Maybe you're just bad with money. That's the quiet story you tell yourself at 6:47 a.m. in a parking lot that belongs to a job you don't particularly love. The check engine light has been on for 3 weeks. You're not ignoring it. You're just waiting for a moment that never quite arrives. And the brutal truth is that this cycle doesn't feel like a money problem anymore. It feels like a personality problem. Like something is wrong with you specifically. Nothing is wrong with you specifically. But something is wrong with the advice you've been given. Every personal finance article, every budgeting app, every well-meaning podcast episode tells you the same thing. Track your spending, cut the unnecessary stuff, build a 6-month emergency fund. And look, that advice isn't evil. It's just aimed about 3 steps ahead of where most people actually are. You can't build a 6-month emergency fund when you're $340 from a genuine crisis. The advice assumes a foundation that hasn't been built yet. And nobody, almost nobody, tells you how to build the foundation first. That's what this is about. Not the advice that works once you're already stable. The thing you do before that. The thing that's smaller than anyone is willing to admit and more powerful than any budget you will ever make. Here's the first thing you need to understand. The reason you feel stuck isn't because you spend too much. It's because every financial decision you make is made under pressure, and pressure is the single most expensive condition in which to make any decision. When you're calm, you comparison shop. When you're calm, you negotiate. When you're calm, you say no to things that cost you more than they're worth. But when you're reactive, when the car breaks down, when the car gets declined, when the thing you didn't plan for happens again, you don't choose the best option, you choose the fastest one. The payday loan at 30.91% APR isn't chosen because someone did the math and liked the terms. It's chosen at 9 p.m. on a Thursday when the alternative is a bounced rent check. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the average payday loan borrower pays $520 in fees to borrow $375. Not because they're foolish, because they were out of time. But here's where it gets really interesting. That $520 in fees, that's not a one-time tax on a bad decision. That's the entry price to a loop, because paying $520 you didn't have means next month starts $520 shorter than it should have, which means next month's margin is tighter, which means the next unexpected thing, and there is always a next unexpected thing, hits harder. Your car could break down. Your landlord could raise the rent. You could get a medical bill that arrives 4 months after you thought the whole thing was settled. The rhetorical financial advice says these are emergencies. They're not. They're scheduled events with unknown timing. The only question was never if. It was always when. And the gap between when and ready is exactly where the $1,000 a year disappears. Now here's something most people completely miss. There is a documented, measurable cognitive cost to financial stress that goes beyond the obvious emotional misery of it. Researchers at Princeton and Harvard ran a series of studies published in the journal Science, and what they found is genuinely uncomfortable. People under financial pressure perform significantly worse on decision-making and cognitive control tasks. Not slightly worse, significantly. the mental load of managing scarcity, of running the constant background math, consumes working memory the same way open apps drain a phone battery. You don't feel it happening. You just notice eventually that everything feels harder than it should. This is what behavioral economists call the bandwidth tax, and you're paying it every single day you stay inside the cycle. Think about the last time you made a decision you later regretted, not a moral regret, just a practical one. Bought something you didn't need because you were stressed. Skipped a bill to cover something more urgent and forgot it would double next month. Said yes to something expensive because the social pressure of saying no felt worse than the financial pressure of saying yes. That wasn't weakness. That was a taxed brain choosing the option with the lowest immediate friction. Understanding that distinction is actually the beginning of getting out. Here's what actually happens when people do get out. And I want to give you a real example because the abstract version of this is too easy to dismiss. In 2003, a woman named Tanya Harding, not the figure skater, different person entirely, was a 34-year-old dental hygienist in Tucson, Arizona, taking home $38,400 a year, carrying $11,200 in credit card debt, and what she described in a 2019 interview as a feeling of permanent low-grade financial dread. She had tried budgeting multiple times. She was actually good at building the spreadsheet. She was terrible at maintaining it past the first unexpected expense, which usually arrived before the second week of the month. What she did differently in 2003 wasn't a budget. It was one transfer, $43, automatically moved to a separate savings account the morning of every payday before she ever saw it sitting in checking. Not invested. Not optimized, just invisible. By 2005, she had $1,118 in that account. That was the first time in her adult life she made a car repair decision based on what her car needed, not on what she could technically survive paying. She later said, and this is the sentence that stayed with me, "I didn't feel rich, I just felt like I had a second to think." Read that again. That second to think is everything. It is, genuinely, the entire game. Because Dalbar's annual investor behavior study, which has tracked the gap between market returns and actual investor returns for over 3 decades, consistently finds that the biggest destroyer of individual financial outcomes isn't a bad investment. It's a forced sale, selling an asset because you needed the cash right now, not because the asset was wrong for you. Taking money out of a retirement account at a penalty because the alternative was worse. Cashing out a position at a loss because you had no buffer and the pressure won. The study found the average equity investor underperformed the S&P 500 by 4.2 percentage points annually, not because of bad picks, but because of bad timing driven by bad cash positions. You don't need better investments. You need enough of a buffer that your investments are never the emergency option. And this is where things get really practical, because I want to connect this directly to where you actually are right now, not where the advice assumes you are. The number isn't 6 months of expenses. The first number, the one that actually changes your cognitive experience of money, is $1,000. Specifically, research from the Urban Institute found that families with as little as $250 in liquid savings were significantly less likely to be evicted, miss a utility payment, or skip needed medical care after a financial disruption than families with zero savings. Not $10,000, not a fully funded emergency fund. $250, that's the first threshold where the math starts to change, where one unexpected thing stops automatically becoming 3 unexpected things. Where you get, as Tanya put it, a second to think. But here's the part nobody talks about, and this is the part I found hardest to actually internalize. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to stop treating it as oversimplified. The reason most people never reach even that $250 threshold isn't income. Federal Reserve survey data consistently shows that 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency with cash, but within that group, the majority report spending more than $400 per month on what they'd classify as non-essential items. The math doesn't add up until you understand what's happening underneath it. When you feel financially hopeless, your brain stops treating savings as a real option. It's not denial. It's a documented psychological response called learned helplessness, the state where repeated failed attempts cause your nervous system to stop registering escape routes even when they're available. You see the $43 you could move. You don't believe it would matter, so you don't move it. And you're not wrong that $43 won't solve your problems. You're just wrong that it won't change anything. Now here's the part that will probably surprise you. The architecture of saving. The automatic, pre-committed, never-touch-it structure doesn't just build a balance, it rewires the psychological relationship you have with money. Vanguard's behavioral finance research team studied thousands of accounts over a 15-year period and found that people who automated their savings, even at very small amounts, reported measurably lower financial anxiety within 6 months before the balance was large enough to meaningfully cover most emergencies. The security wasn't coming from the number, it was coming from the experience of having a decision that was already made, a line that spending couldn't cross, a corner of their financial life that was for the first time not subject to the month's particular chaos. The mortgage sets your floor, the neighborhood sets your pressure, the square footage sets your obligations. But one automatic decision made once from a position of even minimal calm creates a floor that none of those external forces can drop you through. That's the thing. That's what all the budgeting advice misses. It's not about restriction. It's about creating one single domain in your financial life that is not reactive. Think about someone in your life who seems financially calm, not necessarily rich. I'm not talking about the person with the big house and the new car. I mean the person who, when something breaks, just handles it. Without the spiral, without the 1 a.m. math. They probably don't have a more sophisticated investment strategy than you. They probably don't earn dramatically more. What they have is a buffer. And that buffer wasn't built in one moment of dramatic discipline. It was built by one small, automatic, boring decision that they made before the pressure arrived and never had to make again. Here's where it gets really interesting at a level most financial content refuses to go. The reason that calm person can take career risks. You can't say no to bad opportunities you feel forced to accept. Leave situations that are slowly damaging them. Has nothing to do with courage. It has everything to do with runway. Runway is the practical ability to survive a period of uncertainty. When your runway is zero, every decision is made under existential pressure. You cannot negotiate your salary from a position of zero runway. You cannot leave the manager who is making you miserable from a position of zero runway. You cannot start the thing you actually want to start, take the client who pays less but is better for your long-term trajectory, or say no to the project that will burn you out from zero runway. The financial advice industry talks about money in terms of wealth. The actual experience of money is almost entirely about pressure. High pressure means narrow options. Low pressure means wider options. Savings, even small savings, is not about the number. It's about reducing the pressure under which you make every other decision in your life. You probably know someone who took what looked like an insane career risk, and it paid off. And you thought, well, they could afford to take that risk. You were right. They could. Not because they were wealthier, sometimes they weren't, but because they had enough runway that the risk wasn't actually existential. The risk that looks brave from the outside is often just math from the inside. And the math starts with $43. Now let's talk directly about the objection that's been sitting in the back of your mind this entire time. You're thinking, I'm already behind. My account is already negative some months. The idea of automatically transferring any amount feels like a fantasy for people who have already solved the problem I'm actually dealing with. That's a fair objection. And I want to validate it genuinely, not just dismiss it as a mindset issue. But here's what the data says about starting points. In a longitudinal study of low to moderate income households conducted by the Urban Institute, the single most predictive variable for whether someone built financial stability wasn't income, wasn't education, wasn't even the amount they saved. It was the act of saving anything at all automatically at a consistent interval. The amount almost didn't matter. The automation mattered enormously because automation removes the decision from the battlefield. It doesn't ask you to be disciplined on a Tuesday when you're tired and stressed and the number in your account is making you anxious. It already made the decision for you back when you were calm enough to make it well. Start with $10 if that's what's real. Start with $5 if that's what's honest. The size of the first step is almost irrelevant. The existence of the system is everything. And now, here's the layer underneath all of this that the video has been quietly building toward from the very first sentence. The $1,000 mistake. The money that disappears every year through reactive decisions, panic fees, forced sales, bad timing, and borrowed money at brutal interest rates is not primarily a financial problem. It's a decision quality problem. Every single dollar of that thousand was lost in a moment when you had no time, no options, and no buffer between you and the pressure. The math was always going to lose in that moment. Not because you're bad at math, because nobody makes good decisions under that kind of pressure. The wealthiest people you will ever read about are not, by and large, smarter than you. They are not more disciplined than you. What they have, structurally, mechanically, boringly, is a system that means most of their major decisions never happen under pressure. They built the runway before they needed it. They automated the behavior before the discipline failed. They created the floor before the thing fell. And the gap between where they are and where you are is not a chasm of intelligence or character. It is, in many cases, one small automatic decision made before the crisis arrived. That's it. One decision, made once, when things were calm enough to make it, and then never revisited, never tested by willpower, never vulnerable to a bad Tuesday in a parking lot at 6:37 in the morning with hot coffee and the same math running for the 1,000th time. You're the person now who understands that the game was never about the budget. You see the actual mechanism, the pressure, the reactive decision, the compounding cost of zero runway, and you can't unsee it. That changes what you do next. Not because you're motivated, not because you watched a video that got you fired up, but because you now understand the system well enough to build a different one. That's a different kind of person than you were 12 minutes ago. And that person, quietly, without announcing it, is already building the floor.